All right, Tess, you're here. You made it to the Emotionally Uncomfortable podcast. So let's talk about some emotionally uncomfortable things like death and money.
Perfect.
Two taboo subjects. But you and I connected on Instagram, the only dating app that I use to find females in my life. And I love it. I feel like I'm dating people constantly on Instagram. When it comes to like quote unquote networking, but just finding people in the world that have similar values. And for whatever reason, I actually know if it was Instagram or email, but I think you were actually pitching me to be on this podcast.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
you made it.
And I made it. Here we are. So much has happened since that original pitch.
Exactly. But what I appreciated about you when I started following you was your realness and honesty. You weren't like spiritually bypassing like the realities of life, but your background in finance and money and all the things. So we'll talk about that of like what you do. And I'm such a huge advocate of supporting women and helping them become well resourced. But one of the, everyone, it's just online space and media in general is so disillusional of like reality of life. But one of the bigger reasons of why I do what I do is because of we have this one precious life. And I'm sure you've seen this and you personally experienced this. So I want to know your story that, shit happens and then we are not financially well resourced. So I'm going to give you the microphone. Tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're so passionate about this, and how you got to where you are today doing the work you do.
Thank you. Yeah. So I specifically around death, I've become more passionate about using this topic as a lens to live a better life and make better financial choices, which might sound a little counterintuitive. And I'll circle back to that in a second. But over the last, 10 years, I've had a lot of people close to me pass away. And a lot of the situations were pretty tragic. My sister died at 50. My stepdad died 6 months into his retirement. My aunt just passed away a few months ago. And through those experiences, I kept kind of thinking, if this was the last year of my life, what would I want it to look like? And I asked myself that question a lot. And then, and to be honest, my 20s were wild. I did a lot of like fun stuff. I worked on cruise ships. I was an aerial acrobat. I hosted like color runs, those like 5K runs where they threw colored chalk at you that were like super popular for 2 years. I did all kinds of fun stuff. I traveled a lot. I went to like 40 different countries. It was amazing. And back then, I remember asking myself that question and thinking like, yeah, I would be okay. If that was the last year, I'd be okay with that. And then I got to my mid 30s. I spent about 3 months helping my stepdad through hospice. It was a really intense experience, and you're just confronted with death every single day. And we're talking very candidly about his wishes and what he wants. And I'm watching this like decline in real time. And it was cognitive decline, which is like pretty tough to watch. And I think through that experience, I'd say probably the year after he died, maybe the couple years after he died, I was asking myself that same question. If this was like your last year, would you have felt like, yeah, I went out with a bang? And the answer was no. And I got pretty upset about that. And I realized so much of it was just getting caught up in, what we perceive to be success, corporate career, making more money, finding the right partner, all of that stuff, and not necessarily thinking about like what actually truly fulfills us. Maybe those things can. I'm not saying that they can't, but for me, it wasn't. What I was doing at the time wasn't working. And then I ended up leaving corporate. My stepdad's death was the catalyst for me leaving corporate and starting to do something that was truly fulfilling, which was helping other people with my knowledge. So I became an accredited financial counselor. I've worked with hundreds of women since then. I want more money in the hands of women, full stop. It's been awesome. But what I'm also seeing is a lot of women come to me after the thing has already happened, after their husband has died, after they get divorced, after they lose their partner, whatever it is. And then in that moment, when they're grieving, they're also trying to figure out what a 401k really means and how their money's invested and what to do with this inheritance. And it just struck me as so odd that in this moment where, we should be like grieving and working through all the unexpressed love or whatever we need to do, that we're also like, and what's the password for Comcast, and what's an IRA? And so I've been observing that for a few years now, and a lot of my messaging in my business as a financial counselor and educator has been, listen, like, we don't plan for this stuff happens. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And getting a financial education and being financial literate is so helpful when things are challenging in your life. And so I've talked about that a lot. And then earlier this year, watching my aunt go through death with dignity, which is the name in the state of Maine and in the United States of choosing to medically assisted dying. After that, I thought, man, we're just not talking about this enough. I was not emotionally I was so not emotionally ready for all that conversation, even though I had already gone through it a few times, because I never really sat with it. I never really talked about it. I just executed. So she passed away on April 30th of this year. And then since then, a lot of my focus has changed as a financial educator, in the sense that in a variety of ways, in the sense that, one, I want us to acknowledge not the ifs, but the whens. Number two, also that we can use death as a lens to make better financial choices. And I don't mean like YOLO because you're going to die soon. I mean, like, really, what do you want to spend your money on that's going to add value and purpose to your life? And then third, the thing that I've been really focused on is having this conversation with your loved ones is such a powerful way to live a better life now, and such a gift to give them an organized legacy and finances, all of it together. Like, having that conversation is such a gift to live a better life. So for all those reasons, a lot of what I talk about has pivoted. And what's so interesting is, whenever I share about this topic, people want to talk about it so bad, Heather, but they're so afraid. And so, like, the response has been wild. I've had, like, I'll post something about death and get like millions of views on Instagram, because people are so starved to have this conversation. It's like the one shared human experience. We're all going to die and none of us are talking about it. And I think
Yeah.
people want to. So that's a little bit of my
So
journey
what
and
are
how I
they
got here.
saying to you? Like what's when you're like, what is the conversation that they want to have?
So I think it depends on where you are. I'd say I work with mostly millennials. So I would say a lot of millennials at this point are realizing that their parents are at life expectancy, in
Mhm.
or near it. In the United States, life expectancy is 78. So not only are millennials halfway to dead, and I don't mean that in a negative way, I just mean like that's the reality. Like, do we want to keep living this way? Are there things we want to change? But also, the people we care about, our parents, they could go at any time. I think we think like 100 is like the end because they're round numbers, but they're not. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of millennials are realizing and starting to see their parents age and thinking, I actually have no idea what their financial situation is. I have no idea what they want. If they passed away, I wouldn't know what to do with their stuff. Do they want to be cremated? Like, where are their passwords? Stories I want to share. Like, it's everything from tactical to super personal. Like, one of the nicest things that, my aunt and I had a whole month before she passed, which was very cool. We had the weirdest conversations, because death with dignity, like, you choose the day you're gonna die, right? So like in the final week, she was like, should I do a Wednesday? That's like a good hump day. And I'm like, yeah, like Wednesday's probably a better day than like Thursday, because Thursday's rough. It's like right before the weekend. Like, we were like having these like very real conversations. But one of the things that was cool was I was at her house and I got to ask her questions about her life and things. And like this, I actually have this on my desk right here. I'll show you. This is a statue of Ganesha that her grandfather gave her. This is like an ivory statue. And she like wrote this note because I asked about it. And so now I like know where this comes from, which is super cool. I would have probably sold it. I would have no idea what to do with it. And like, what a cool gift. So I think that people want to talk about everything from the practical to the emotional, and just have no idea where to start because we make this conversation so taboo and weird.
Okay, you know what's interesting? We're talking about death, end of life. How do you want to live? How you kind of reframe from, in my 20s, I was like, YOLO. versus not like end of life planning, but the middle is money, is financial literacy. And like, sure, we need to know the passwords. We need to do all of those things, like how we deal with that. I remember a family member, her husband passed not suddenly, it was coming. And when he passed, not only did she not know how to like pay the electrical bill, but everything was just like caught up to the point where she's like, I can't buy groceries. And I get a call the night before asking for a lawyer because they didn't have a will or like all these legal things. And I thought, well, number one, like you're not going to be able to do this in time. And then he passed before they were able to do this. But I thought, we just avoid because we don't want to feel, and we don't want to feel the inevitable. And but yet resistance, what you resist will persist and grow bigger. And the interesting part about this is we want to experience our life. Like people are listening to this episode, like this podcast, because they want to feel free. They want to feel alive, they want energy, they want to live a quote unquote quality life. But in order to get there, you have to look at the shit you've been avoiding. And money, like we're talking about, like what to do. So what do? You're the millennial. I would be in that category of like, I'm starting to think of that gap, that generational sandwich gap where I have these kids, I gotta, get them into adulthood. And then I have my own shit to deal with. And then now I have to take on the burden, because it is a burden, of my parents and their situation. And I'm like, I'm still just trying to figure out my own shit. So it's like, where do you begin? What do you do? And like, we're looking at this through like I think, is this two different conversations, or is this like a money conversation of like, preparing your family for the inevitable versus living a financially lucrative like quality life? So what are you teaching people when they come to you that you're like, you should have did this 20 years ago?
So it's both. I think money and estate planning, which I think is a terrible name for it, like end of life planning, death plan, like call it what it is. Estate planning is the most ludicrous name for that. It's both, because at a very basic level, we need money to live. We need the people around us to have money to live, and the more they understand it, the better their life is going to be. First, money has to first of all just be repositioned as a tool. It's not good, it's not bad. It is a tool. It is a resource we can use for time, freedom, influence, impact, options, flexibility, independence, all of those things. It's just a tool. And all of those things are things that we want for our family. So I genuinely believe that financial literacy has been so misunderstood as this like thing that we have to do versus an opportunity to be better with your money to create a great life. And I think part of that is when you understand how you can use money, instead of asking, a lot of people come to me and say, what should I invest in a Roth IRA? Should I invest in this fund? And it's always the wrong question. The question is, what do you want your money to do for you? And then it's, what tool am I going to use to help me get there? And a lot of us want the same things. We want comfortable retirement. We want to set our kids up. We want to make sure our parents are okay. But what I would say is, somebody that's like feeling like everything's a mess, you have to prioritize at some point. So a good example of this would be like, okay, let's say you're in the sandwich generation and you've got parents that are a little bit older, but they're relatively healthy. But you're realizing all of a sudden that if something happened to you, your kids, you don't have things set up for your kids in a way that they would be okay, right? That might be your priority. You can deal with your parents later. You can't do this all at once. So anytime you're going to go into a conversation about money and what you should be doing with your money and whether you should be saving it or investing it or learning about a certain way to grow your money or a certain account, before you even get to all that, what do you need and what do you want? What do you want for your own life and what do you want for the people around you, short term and long term? And then you start to prioritize stuff. And then you look at your money, your cash flow, your assets, and start to figure out what you want to do with them. But so often we look at it as like, oh, well, I should be matching my 401k, or I should be doing this. And we need to stop saying that and reverse engineer. And what might happen when you do that is you might realize you want to make more money so that you can do your things, the things that you want, or you might realize that you already have enough money to do all the things you want, right? So that's like the number one requirement before you do any of this is you got to figure out what your priorities are.
Also, just having like I as you were talking, I was just thinking having the privilege to spend that time with your aunt the last month
Yeah.
of her life to just have the capacity and the space and to have resources to do that. And I think so often people are like, oh, I just got to work. I got to work. I got to work. I got to build. And like, why? What is the bigger vision? You can work all you want, but what is the bigger vision? And are you doing it from a place of lack or abundance? Like, it's not this all or nothing, right? So I want to ask you some rapid fire questions of like, what would you do? Like, kind of, this is the scenario. Where do people start?
Sure.
Okay. So someone's sitting there, they're in a lot of consumer debt, right? Their credit cards are maxed, personal or professional credit cards. They know they need to quote unquote make more money. But what would be the first thing that you would suggest where they're like, I need to pay down debt, but I also need to like reinvest in the new future? I hear this a lot from people of like, I just got to pay off debt first. So it's like they're in this vicious cycle. So what do you say to that individual who's trying to create a new future and break patterns, financial patterns?
So the first thing I would say to that person is, do you know your cash flow? Do you know how money comes in and out of your life? Do you know too how much it costs to live your current life? Because if you don't know the answer to either of those questions, throwing random amounts at debt, you're very likely to get back into debt because you haven't created the systems to support a life that doesn't involve you getting into debt.
Mhm.
So this happens to a lot of people. They'll like come into a cash windfall and then pay off a bunch of debt at once. It doesn't work because you haven't, you're just like, that's just a symptom, right? You haven't actually figured out what is the behavior or the consistent cash situation that's putting you there to begin with. So that's like always the first step is like cash flow and really understanding how much it costs to live your life. What is the cost of your life? And maybe what is the cost of your like essentials life, and what is the cost of the life you really want to live? What does that actually look like?
Mhm. What do you say to the business owner who feels like they're sinking? When are they supposed to give up and throw in that? And I'm curious if you do this because I come from a different perspective because I attract a lot of business owners. Not everyone I work with is a business owner, but in a business where they're just like, I keep throwing money at the problem, it's sinking, the economy, blah, 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 blah. What do you say there when a business feels like a huge energy financial leak?
So kind of the same answer.
Okay.
I mean, I'd really want to know one, like, first of all, are you running the business you want to run? Like, is there a larger issue here that you're just not emotionally connected or energetically connected to your business in a way that's ever going to make it successful? Like, do you want to be here? Like, let's make sure we have that conversation first. But assuming you do, and you're really motivated and you want to have this business, most business owners don't know what's coming in and what's going out. And it's impossible to make smart financial decisions about anything around your business if you don't know those numbers. And I'd also say you need to honestly forecast what your business can make. If you've been in business for a while, you should have some data. You should know, roughly how much you've sold, how much effort it take. Even if you don't have all the perfect data, you could still kind of figure out what came in, what went out, and why. And then from there, you can start to figure out, is there something inherently wrong with the business? Are you just not choosing the right things that are allowing you to reinvest in your business in a way that helps it grow? But it's kind of this, it's always the same answer. Like, you can't answer any question about business unless you actually understand the numbers in your business.
Yep. I also see a lot of people that avoid like the plague revenue generating activities and try to throw money at the problem of like, I'll hire this person, they'll solve it. I'll hire like their overhead is so big, but they will avoid any sales conversation. They will avoid picking up the phone, sending an email, just trying to generate
Oh,
revenue that is already coming in. Because most of the time I mean, marketing in general and sales has shifted in the last few years, but I'm like, if you just got to pick up the fucking phone and talk to people. And People don't want to do that anymore. They're like, let me build a long, drawn out funnel and a marketing sequence to do that and throw a whole bunch of money. All these people that said it's going to cost you thousands of dollars are throwing money into ads when that's not working. Um, the reason why I asked you that is because the next question about identity, and curious how you feel about this, changing those generational patterns. So I think a lot of people are very, very aware. So something that I have done over the years is the more money I make secretly, the more money you're going to spend if you're not paying attention to it, right? Because it's like you get more comfortable, it gets easier. I can tell when I'm like not paying attention or just like boom, boom, boom. Sure, I got systems and strategies in place, processes are there, savings, investing is happening. But I have like gotten to a point where I'm like meticulous. Like my husband and I, well, sometimes most of the time I will lead the conversation because I enjoy suffering. And I will go line by line and I'm like, let's look at this again. Where are we slowly leaking energy? And the interesting part about that is it's not about the more money you make, the more money you can spend and living this like freedom based, I don't give a shit, fuck you money life. It's about like paying attention to it. I've also noticed that some money anxiety has gotten worse the more money I make. And so I want to talk about money identity and changing those spending habits. And then I want to ask you about some like end of life. What do we do as the sandwich generation supporting our parents? So, yeah, curious your
Sure.
thoughts on that question.
So when it comes to money beliefs, it's a very complicated question because we have so many inputs. We have media inputs that we got since we were kids watching, all those soap operas of rich kids living their life, right? So like from very early age, we're getting an input from the media, we're getting input from our parents that might have had a relationship with, everyone has an interesting relationship with money, right? So that is absolutely affecting us. Whether or not you had friends in your early 20s around you that were comfortable talking about money, most of the time the answer is no. So between the lack of education in the first place, the media, the financial industry itself that often makes money feel way more complicated than it needs to be, and your parents' relationship with money, which probably isn't that great as far as financial literacy, because back then a lot of people had pensions. You didn't really like need to do money in the way that we need to do it now. And so I think the first thing is recognizing, like, giving yourself grace for whatever your relationship with money is today. It's not necessarily your fault. Like, we get so many crazy money inputs. And from the time we're 7, your like financial beliefs start to be created. There's like tons of studies around that, which is wild. Like, you have an opinion about money when you're 7 years old.
Interesting.
All that to say, it's really important to understand that all of those inputs are good to acknowledge, but it's your responsibility to actually have the conversation with yourself in terms of what is your current belief with money and why might that be the case.
Yeah.
So, some questions that you can ask yourself are like, what did my parents believe about money? Does that or does that not impact how I spend money? I can tell you from my personal experience, I'll give you a great example. So my father was somebody that dressed very nice. He talked constantly about luxury brands. When I met him, I was 7 years old. He picked us up in a Mercedes AMG. He had big, thick, like coffee table books. Everything was rich, expensive, luxury. Like that was the message I was getting. And I very much thought he was very wealthy. And to me, that's what I thought success was. So I remember when I was like 16, I decided like the way I was going to make this guy proud, I was going to buy a Ferrari. Like that was my plan. I was going to make enough money to buy a Ferrari. And then in contrast, my mother's house was, we had what we needed. She drove a Saturn. I was constantly hearing like, we don't have enough money to pay for this. So the result of that for me was that I was extremely aware of money in these two totally different spaces. And I was very confused as to what success was going to look like for me. So I was paying attention. And then what ended up happening is I started to realize that my mother was actually fine and my father was in tons and tons of debt. And so much so that asked me for $10,000 in my 20s for a car after my sister died. Ended up stealing my sibling's credit card and putting $50,000 of credit card debt under my sibling's name. Like, and I thought this man was super wealthy. So I'm an accredited financial counselor for a reason, right? I'm kind of obsessed with how money works in our lives because I grew up in these two totally different environments.
Yeah.
And the result of that was I thought I needed luxury, realized I didn't, and now I'm deeply afraid of running out of money all the time. So, but I know that, right? And it's not necessarily something that I can get rid of right away, but I'm pretty aware of how I think about money because I've thought about this so much. And obviously, it's my job and I get the privilege of working with a lot of great people. So I share that anecdote to say that you're going to have some weird shit with money for sure. Like everyone does. What that looks like for you is going to be different depending on your inputs, but it's 100% your responsibility to figure it out and then figure out what you want and what financial information or things about finance you need to learn to get there. I think that we overcomplicate like financial literacy and money and investing all the time. And people say, like, I'm just bad with money or it's not something I can learn. If you get obsessed with anything for 3 years, you can change your life, right? Like, if you're just like, you know what, I'm going to get good at money. If you just like make that decision, knowing that you're not good at it now, you can learn the basics. Like, there's nothing that says you can't. It's all that bullshit that you've heard throughout your whole life that makes you feel that way. And so the only way to get past that is to actually do some of that work yourself and think about why you feel the way you do about money.
Okay. I love this conversation. I realized a few years ago, I'm like, I'm not a money person, but that I manage energy and time and support people to do that. And I was like, oh my gosh, it is so correlated. And then I also had systems to quote unquote manage my cash flow in place. And then people were like, I would send them to like a money person. I'm using air quotes because I'm like, oh, you need to go talk to this person. And that person would overcomplicate it so much for them and disempower them around their money. It's like, why don't I just show you what I do? So I created a one pager. I'm like, I'm not a financial advisor or creditor. I'm like, this is from personal experience. I'm like, get the core foundation in place and then like go talk to these people. I realized most of their challenges were like opening their bank accounts and like physically just pen to paper, like looking at where they are leaking and spending their money. I'm like, you don't need a financial person for that. You just need to open your damn bank accounts and like cry in fetal position as you're going line by line and have these emotionally uncomfortable conversations. I tell people do this with your partner, and if your partner won't show up to the conversation, you do it solo. Like take radical responsibility. Now, I want to ask you a question about children. And the reason why I want to ask you this is because I'm raising three boys. My oldest is 20. He's on his own. So I'm asking you I'm hoping you're gonna like make me feel really good about myself today. This is my intention. I have decided to teach my children how to fish instead of giving them the fish. And what I mean by that is teaching them the value of a dollar and dealing with the natural consequence of spending that dollar before you have the dollar. The duality that I sit with is somebody who came from I had very similar homes like you where my mother had less, my father quote unquote had more, and it just looked like two different lifestyles. So I do have a fear of losing it all. I also think that comes from like just experiencing so much death and like the reality that like everything in life is uncertain, so you have to have some protection of that. So I can give air quotes my children more. I also grew up hanging out with like very privileged kids when I had nothing. So I want my children to have a different experience than I did. Where's this boundary crossed? But I'm telling you right now, watching my older children, my oldest, on his own, learn the value of a dollar and how to budget and the natural consequence of your prefrontal cortex not being fully developed is very uncomfortable for me to sit and watch. And versus, and I hear this from my clients all the time, they're like, yeah, my kid is in college and they're still sucking from the financial teat and I can't get them off the tit. And I was like, but look, when I go through, I'm like, Uber Eats, I'm not paying for Uber Eats. I'm not paying for a better lifestyle, like for you to live a better lifestyle than what I live. And so this is where I think we are culturally. And I'm like, if your clothes are nicer than me and you were drinking Starbucks way more than me, I just don't see what I'm actually funding. This is not in alignment with how I want to feel. So, what do you need to say to modern parenting? This is driving me nuts because I'm trying to hold the boundary. And then there is a part of me that's feeling the cultural pressure. And I'm like, I'm not feeding it. And then my kid hates me because I won't be like every other parent.
So, the way I want to answer this question is to build off what we were just talking about in terms of beliefs, in the sense that to like really simplify my philosophy on money, and after working with 300 plus people, what I believe to be true, money is psychologically difficult, tactically very fucking simple. When you create systems, you spend less than you make. A portion of your money goes to savings, a portion goes to investing, a portion goes to pay off debt, whatever you have. That system does not need to be complicated. If you've never learned it, sure, there's a little bit of a learning curve to think about how you're going to manage your money. But once you learn how to do it, it's not difficult. My whole business model is about me working myself out of a job constantly, right? I teach people, it's a terrible business model. I teach people how to manage their money, their cash flow. They get it, they move on with their life, and they don't have financial issues in the future because we figured out the psychological piece. We moved on to setting up tactical systems, and now they know how to regulate and how to change and how to make better decisions in service of their goals. So, all this to say, I 100% admire and appreciate what you are doing, and creating generational wealth is so much more powerful if the next generation actually understands how to use their money, because then they're able to, once they start to make more money, donate more to causes they care about, take care of the people around them, give back to their communities, whatever it is. And I think that when you as a parent start giving your children money and trying to save them before they have a chance to learn the basics, to learn the value of a dollar, you're really enabling them to not truly take ownership of one of the most important things to understand to live a good life. It just is. Like, people that say money isn't everything, money doesn't buy happiness, that's total bullshit. Of course it buys happiness, not like in a box, but it buys you the ability to have choices and decision making. So my perspective on it is that the most powerful generational wealth you can pass down is knowledge. And then, sure, if your kids are doing well and they're in their 30s and they want to buy a house and they're not wasting all their money on, like, I don't know, Gucci and Gabbana, like, for sure help them out with that. Like, that's awesome. Like, that's an awesome thing to give them. But to constantly be paying for their life when they aren't necessarily making good financial choices, that's just enabling them and setting them up for future failure. So I am actually in the camp of truly, like, letting your kids figure it out, helping them figure it out, not just giving them money, right? But then ideally they're in a place where you feel really good about helping them out when things get more difficult, because in your 20s it's actually like not that, you don't have kids, you probably don't have a house, like,
Mhm.
if you have a job and you have an income, like, you can make choices to make your life go. But
Yeah.
there might come a time when they're older, when they have a family and they're trying to get a house and things are like tight, and then if you want to come out of the woodwork then and support, like, that's awesome. But I'm with you, I support what you're doing 100%, and I get concerned at the limiting beliefs that parents put on their children about money. And so I'll give you an example. I had a couple that I worked with, and they have a 19-year-old daughter, and she's in college. She has a retail job. She had a settlement for an accident. She's okay, thank goodness. And they just kept saying things like, "Well, she just works retail. Like, she's too young to start investing," or like really talking down about her ability to understand finance. And I was like, absolutely not. I've had 11-year-olds that I've taught the basics of investing. And by doing that, and then they didn't have confidence in money. They were projecting that on their daughter. And that's tough. Like, I try to be delicate with how I say this to them, but I'm like, you might be underestimating your daughter here. You're not even giving her a chance to learn and to see how she actually interacts with money.
Yeah. I have found it's the emotional discomfort of holding the boundaries, and that it goes back to everything, that it's the holding of the emotion of my own shit, to see my child struggle and know when to quote unquote rescue versus natural consequence and the discomfort and nuance of that. And it's fascinating because when I think about how I learned financial literacy, it was reading, learning, doing, failing. And, I think we've swung so far where it's like our parents didn't talk to us about money, or they were like, money doesn't grow on trees, or all the things that they say. And then now we're like protective, like, let's just do, oh, I've learned. So now I'm going to do it. It's like we need to go in the middle of, great, you want this? Amazing. Let's talk about the how behind it. Let's talk about the why. Let's talk about where it comes from. And you have to have capacity, mental, physical, emotional capacity to be able to have those conversations, which is why I encourage people to do your own damn work so we can teach the next generation. So now that we're in this gap, this generational gap of, sure, I have these kids that I want to have more financial literacy. I don't want to be a burden on them when I'm in my 70s and 80s. And then I have my parents that, let's just be honest, are going to be a burden on me. And so there's this, I don't want to be a burden. There is going to be a burden. What do you do for, what do you say to those millennials that are in that gap, especially when it's preparing for the future? And I want to relieve some of that. So, resources that you have for how to get our shit in order.
So, this is one of those put your mask on before assisting others. If you are feeling really stressed about how to support both, part of that, not all of it, but part of that probably has to do with you feeling that you have a lack of control on your current financial life. Because if you did, you'd probably go, okay, this is what I'm making. This is what I've got. This is what I need to make sure that I'm not a burden to my children. And here's how I can help my parents. Or at least you're like starting to figure that out. You can't really figure out how you operate within that sandwich until you have your own shit together.
Yeah.
So just like you can't pour into anyone else's cup until you're like energetically in a good place, it's the same thing. Like you're not going to be able to help your kids or your parents if you're not confident in managing your own cash flow, if you're not confident in the basics of investing and saving, and you're not marching towards your goals. The reality is, in a situation like that, some goals might have to take a backseat, right? You're going to have to make some trade-offs. And that's where I go back to what I said earlier, where the first part of this conversation is always, what do I want my money to do for me? And what are my priorities? And you have to prioritize. Not everything can be a priority. So you have to prioritize and then work against those priorities. But all of that is very difficult unless you haven't, and if you haven't taken control of your own financial situation first. And the reality is, if you're in this situation, if you're a millennial, you've probably been kind of fair weather about your money for a while.
Yeah.
Like, take another 6 months, three to 6 months, and figure out your money. Like, that's usually the amount of time that I work with people. And in that time period, people go from, I don't know my password to my bank account, to I have an understanding and a system for my cash flow. We're not doing this like, there's technology for everything. This doesn't take a lot of time. So by the way, if you're like talking through that excuse, I don't have time to do this, it's not a thing. This is super important. You have time. There's systems for it. It actually doesn't take as much time as you think. It's psychologically difficult, but it doesn't take that much time to figure out how money comes in and out, to start to portion off your money towards your goals. It's just not that difficult. It's psychologically difficult, but tactically not. So that's my very like oversimplified answer, is like, you have to take 3 to 6 months, figure out your stuff, and then you can sit there and be like, okay, this is where I'm at now. How do I want to handle these other things?
Love it. Okay. Where I know you have resources for people and they can get more of you. We've jumped around a lot in this conversation, to end of life, to, YOLO, like live your best life, to breaking generational patterns. And we didn't talk a lot about the tactical because that's not the fun stuff to talk about sometimes. Well, especially on my podcast, a lot of times it's more of like the why behind it, right? Like you said, the tactical is the easy part. It's the psychology around the tactical. So I'm like, hey, if you like, to me, I'm motivated to give, I'm motivated to make an impact, I'm motivated to be resourced, I'm motivated to be helpful to people and just to break generational patterns. So that's my why behind it. And then the tactical is not that sexy. So, do you have tactical resources for people if they're like, I need to know the how, I need to get started with this? Where do they go? What do you got for them?
Yes. So the best place to go would be to moneyconfidentclub.com. And it's a very simple site and it just has a bunch of free like mini courses and resources. There's a beginner investing guide. There's a calculator on calculating how much you need in retirement. There's a guide to starting these conversations around death. So there's tons of different stuff. If you want help, you can also apply for one-on-one coaching through there. So very simple site, moneyconfidentclub.com. That's the best place to start. Or you can also follow me on Instagram at Wealth with Tess. And I post a ton of really short, like tactical videos there as well to help you get started.
Your shit is funny too. You are very funny.
Thank you.
I I love the reel you did about the what was it? The oh
The
my gosh,
facelift fund.
the facelift fund. And I was like, I'm like, you know how many women probably ran to the bank or like went online and were like, I need to start a facelift fund.
Oh.
How dare we do that for retirement? How dare we do that for a rainy day so that we can have the capacity to be with our end of life family members? But, a facelift, that is a number one priority.
You know what actually bothered me most about that video is that she talked about just saving it. And I was like, at least if you're going to start a facelift fund and not use that money for 20 years, which was the suggestion, make sure it's actually invested so it's growing. So then when you get to your 50s and you're like, I actually don't need a facelift because now I'm fine, now you just have a lot more money. So if you're going to do a facelift fund for whatever reason, just make sure it's
Whatever gets you
invested.
whatever gets you started, right?
Yeah,
Whatever
yeah,
your
that's motivating. Like, do
Yeah,
that.
whatever your motivator is, just
Mhm.
get it going. Is there a legacy you want to leave, Tess, when it comes to all the work you're doing? Like, how do you want people to feel at the end of the day? How do you want to be remembered with the work you're doing?
I want people to feel like they have options and are able to make bold choices, whatever that means for them. Like that, the whole reason I like talking about money is not because of luxury or Ferraris. It's like options to do cool stuff, hang with cool people. Like that's literally it. That's the whole thing. Just options and ability to make bold and weird choices. Like right now, actually, tomorrow, I didn't tell you this, I have a ballroom dancing competition tomorrow for my
Congrats.
first ballroom dancing competition. This sport is like expensive, but I am able to do this really weird, obscure thing that I know no other people in real life that do this because I've saved my money and now my investments pay for my hilarious hobby that does really nothing for the greater good, but it's awesome and it's fun and it's weird and I love it. So
And it
like
brings you joy.
it does. It does. So, yeah. And then also, like with all this stuff going on right now in the US, and right at the time we're having this conversation, there's about to be a lack of funding for people that are under resourced with food. I'm able to donate to a bunch of food banks. Like, that's what I get to do this week. I get to help people get fed and I get to go dance my face off in this very uncomfortable, like pink dress. Like, that's awesome, right? That's like what it is for me right now. Whatever your version of that is, like, that's what I want.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Thank you. We'll share all the things. I know you're going to be coming into my community as well, and we're going to be doing more together next year. So, ladies, we're going to be well resourced. So, thanks for being here, Tess.
Thank you for having me.